Hello, I want to welcome you all to our coffee and conversation. My name is Sarah Carell, the founder of The Power of Our Story. And we are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. So today, I'm so excited to be able to introduce you to Phyllis Rogers. She has been somebody that I think the power of our story, we always have these conversations about how do we protect those who protect us? How do we protect their mental health from all the critical incidents or the traumatic events that they experience constantly? How do we protect them? So today I'm excited that Phyllis will be able to share her story and then also start our conversation today on that very topic of really understanding what helps our protectors stay healthy. So a little bit about Phyllis. Phyllis has been a licensed therapist in the state of Washington since 2000. She is the founder and director of In Life Clinic, LLC, established in 2010, which provides counseling services to first responders and their families through a team of 7 culturally competent therapists. In Life also contracts with first responder agencies to provide on-site mental health support. And then MHPs are there, the mental health practitioners. In 2021, Seattle Police Department contracted with Phyllis to place an MHP at each precinct and work with the wellness team. Each MHP works 5 hours at their assigned precinct, building relationships and trust with the officer through ride-alongs, break room conversations, and being able to provide support with both work and personal stressors. When requested, we provide critical incident or officer involved shooting response. We lead critical incident stress debriefings and defusings. Phyllis also serves as the lead MHP for the King County Sheriff's Peer Support Team, providing training, conducting critical incident debriefings, and offering individual counseling to deputies and consultation to the peer support team. She has led a support group for officers who have been involved in officer-involved shootings or other lethal events in the greater Seattle area, volunteering her time to support traumatized officers. So, Phyllis, I just want to thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful that we met. Thank you to Chris Gregorio. And I am just going to hand it over to you, and then we'll start the conversation after you're done sharing. So, Phyllis, again, welcome.
Thank you. I feel very honored to be amongst such great people. So thank you for inviting me. I might want to just continue to come and join you. It's just such a wonderful group. Um, she asked me to share my story and my background. It actually starts before I became a therapist. I was 34. My husband was 35 when he was in a car accident. And our children were 3, 6, and 8. And he spent 10 years in a vegetative state. And I took care of him and I raised our kids. And, I'm a woman of faith. I believe God could heal him. And so for 5 years, I kind of stood on that and just kept hanging in there. And after 5 years, I felt like I heard God say, you need to let go of the hope of his healing and figure out who you are without him, which was devastating because he was a very large personality. Everybody loved him. Everybody wanted to be his friend. I just loved hanging out with him. And so I went into therapy, probably should have been in long before that, but we were living below the poverty line and just didn't have the money. And so I went into therapy, and through that, I decided to go back to school. And my late husband, Scott, had a degree from Stanford, had an MBA. I had 2 years of college, and he kept telling me I should go back. So in a way, it was fulfilling something that he desired as well. So I put Scott in a nursing home. I'd been caring for him at home, and I put him in a nursing home and started back to school. And most of my credits didn't transfer, so it had been 20 years since I'd gone to school. I was 40 now, and I ended up having to do 3 years of school in two. And someone gave me a computer, and I had to learn how to use a computer to do my schoolwork in. And and I had dyslexia, and so I always struggled through school and all the reading, and so I didn't know if I'd really be able to make it through. But at graduation, when I'm watching those master students get their hoods, I'm like, I can do this. I did this. I can do that. And in that moment, I decided to keep going. And so I got my master's in counseling, started out being a medical family therapist, I thought, to help families who would go through things like I went through, because I didn't know how people got through it. I mean, it's tough. All the decisions, all the medical stuff, there's a string of people involved, insurance, all of it. But I quickly found I didn't fit in the academic world. I worked at the University of Washington, the family practice clinic, and I'm like, no, this isn't my world. And I ended up leading the ministry at my church. And then all of a sudden, after 5 years of, it was called healing relationships, people were getting healed in their relationships. It was really amazing. And the pastor said, we're not going to do it anymore. And I said, well, what do I do now? It was my prayer. I kept asking God, and I got a call from a chaplain, and I knew him, and I had watched him as he became this police and fire chaplain. And he goes, I need another chaplain, and every time I pray, yours is the only name I get. And I'm like, a what? A police and fire chaplain? No, I knew he did something like that, but I didn't really know what it was. And so, but I knew in my heart that was what God was calling me to do. So I met with him and started going through training. Started to have the backgrounds done and all of that. And I volunteered my time for 7 years being a police and fire chaplain with Redmond, which is the town where Microsoft is located, and worked with them for 7 years until the police chief um, came to me. And I'd see clients 2 days a week, and then literally was available, getting up in the middle of the night, going on calls, going on scenes. And then if it was a really bad call, I would go back to the stations, whether it was both fire and police, and I check in on them to see how they were doing. Are they doing okay? And started peer support teams for both of them with the other chaplain. And so after 7 years, the police chief came to me and he said, I'd like to hire you to work on site as an MHP. And so he said, but you can't be a chaplain anymore because you can't be paid for an organization and volunteer. So um, he put me over the chaplains. So I oversaw the chaplains and I started working on site. And then a month later, King County Sheriff called me, said, would you work with us? And this thing, as I was working with these different agencies, it just began to expand. And then I started talking, I'm working with 4 different agencies now, doing on-site work and working with their peer support team, doing debriefings. And I was thinking it's time to start preparing for the years ahead to retire. And I felt like God said, no, what you're doing is too important. And I want you to raise up more people to do what you're doing. So that's kind of my background, how I ended up doing this, how I ended up in the beginning, I was seeing first responders and others, but eventually the need for first responder counseling and culturally competent therapists were few and far between. And so eventually I had to slowly cut out all of my regular clients and just see first responders and their families. So I've been working with first responders for almost 18 years now. And I've seen this shift. And those of you who've been in a first responder or working with them for long, they say it takes 10 miles to turn a cargo ship around in the ocean. And I feel like that was a good analogy for what's happening with mental health and for the first responder world. That when I started, 17, 18 years ago, it was over here and it's slowly making the turn around. And I feel like we're starting to come to the other side where it's more normalized, at least on the coast. I think it's a little slower to go in the Midwest, but we're doing a better job, but we're not doing everything that we can to support our first responders and all of you.
Thank you so much for that, Phyllis. So, I'm curious, in all the work that you've been doing, can you think of something that you really wish first responders and even the general public knew? Like from everything that you have to deal with, the stories that you hear, what you see, what do you want people to know?
Well, if you say, what do I wish the public knew? I wish they understood what you go through. They don't get it. They don't understand. And, I was here for the riots in Seattle, and I've been working with the Seattle police. When I got there a year after the riots, they had I don't know how familiar you are, but they were on what's called a blue and gold schedule. So you're 12 on, 12 off, 12 on, 12 off. Well, you don't hardly have time to sleep. Just eat, give your wife a hug or your kids a hug, and you're back at work. And it was horrible. The stories I've heard are horrible of what they experienced and not being able to defend themselves. And so I started a group just to help them heal. And I wish the public understood how traumatizing the work you do is, what you see, what you experience, because I just very few really understand that. And I think, the defund the police, they clearly had no idea, what you do, that you would lay down your life for someone you don't know, a citizen on the street. And I don't think they understand that every day you say goodbye to your spouse, not knowing if you're going to return. The sacrifices that you make. As far as what I wish more people knew, and one of my mantras is when you have a traumatic event, you need to deal with it then. Don't just shove it down. Because a lot of law enforcement come in from the military, and you've learned well how to shove it down, right? Shove it down, because it's the mission first. You got to keep going. And so law enforcement used to be like that as well. But you come in knowing how to do that. And, you put it in a box and keep going. Well, it shows up in some form, depression, anxiety. I think you all have seen this and know this and maybe experienced it. It leaks, I say, it leaks out at some point. You can't just contain it. And so to deal with each critical incident as you experience them so they don't accumulate, because the accumulative stress is what I think often um, can literally emotionally or mentally or even physically kill people.
Well, thank you so much for that. And it's really good to know that Seattle PD is supporting their officers by having you be their debriefer and training others to do what you're doing. Is this common amongst police departments across the United States? You said more on the West Coast they're doing it. Do you find that what you're doing is more on the rare side, or what are you seeing kind of in the bigger picture?
Well, I think the two coasts are always kind of the front runners. Have you found that to be true too? That the East Coast and West Coast, start things and are doing more mental health. Um, I I think that's what I meant by that comment, that they're kind of the front runners and then it kind of moves inward into the United States. I think that more um, bigger agencies are starting to do things like having an MHP as either permanently on their team or contracted with one. I'd be curious to know what you're experiencing down in your area. And I've met, several first responder therapists from the greater Los Angeles area over the years. And so, I think that it's becoming more and more common, which I'm so grateful to see. I think that what I'm doing at Seattle um, is not as common, having an MHP at each precinct, but I'd like to see it be more common and have other agencies start to implement that.
Is there a way to measure the impact that you're making being able to do that versus other agencies that don't have that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that would take some research because what I hear is just the feedback. And in the beginning, the officers, it takes about 6 months, when you're in there for them to get used to you being around and to talk to you and to begin to trust you. Trust, as you know, is a huge thing among first responders, and it takes time to build that trust. Um, and so I think that as we've done that, I'm at East Precinct in Seattle, which is the precinct that was in the heart of the riots and the precinct that they gave up if you followed that story. And it's the precinct that nobody wants to work at. Nobody, I say, you can come see me at East Precinct. They go, no, I don't go to East. So it's got a lot of trauma just there alone. But I'm seeing, healing happen. And some of the officers who've come to be in we call it riot restoration group. That's 6 weeks long for 2 hours once a week. Some of them have said they didn't even realize how much they had shoved down. So as we begin to talk, which I love this because it's really about talking out loud, taking what you're shoving down in here and beginning to talk out loud and having someone hear your story is so important. And it's hard. It's hard for some. The first session we always I say, I want you to tell your story of what you experienced in the riots. I said, I don't want you to tell the story that you tell all your friends and family. I want you to tell me the story what you experienced and how it impacted you. And I've had officers breaking down crying as they tell the story, and they say, I've never told that story before. And it's been 4 years, almost 5 now. And so I think that that's one of the powerful things. And I love what you're doing here. It's telling your story, being able to talk. And we have a new deputy chief that just came on. He was at the East Precinct yesterday. So the captain and the two lieutenants were talking to him. So I kind of grabbed one of them and I said, introduce me. And so I got to introduce and which was really nice. But what was especially honoring was one of the lieutenants said, she's really made a difference here at our precinct. And, to hear that from a lieutenant or a captain, it's really a high honor. You'll hear it from, the officers, the patrol officers or detective, but to hear it from command staff is rare.
That's fantastic. That is like East Precinct is modeling what should be happening. It
Mm.
sounds like that's beautiful work. Thanks, Phyllis. Can you just walk us through before I open it up to the group? Can you walk us through, for instance, maybe when that all happened in Seattle, like well, you came in a year later, right?
Yeah.
Okay. After maybe a big incident, can you walk us through what it looks like what you do?
Well, yes, they always call us. So, if there's a critical incident, we had a mom, for example, forget to set her brake while she's picking up her kid. The car rolled backward and killed a student, pinned a young, seventh grader against the fence, and other students saw it. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible incident, and it traumatized, the officers who were there. It was, um, and so what we did after that is that we show up on scene, or if the scene is too chaotic and there's really not a lot we can do, we'll be then at the precinct and wait for them to come back and just checking in, and letting them talk, asking them how they're doing, sometimes I'll ask, has this triggered anything else? Because sometimes an event will trigger other traumas that are unresolved. So we'll talk, I'll give them handouts, not a long talk. Like I do the same thing after an officer involved shooting. I always am called and go on scene, and then I go what we call the field investigation office, the FIT office. So I'll go there because they spend hours there afterwards, and I'll sit with them. And then I meet with them 3 days, within 3 days after that, after an OIS. And then I meet with them every other week till they go back to work. For a critical incident, we'll meet with the officers and we'll kind of watch who's having a hard time. And we'll be following up, checking in on them. Either I will or my other clinicians. And if they're really struggling, often I will ask the agency to pay for their counseling, in which they almost always do. They'll pay for a certain amount of sessions. Which I like when agencies do that because it shows they're supporting their officers or their firefighters. They could use their insurance, sure. Boy, they have good insurance, right? But having seen the agency actually pay for the sessions, is a real sign of support to the officers. So we try to provide that. Then if it was a lot of officers that were really involved, then we have what's called a critical incident stress debriefing. Have any of you done those? Are you familiar with them? Okay, I see one hand there. And so we will do those, and that's made up of a team of peer support, usually two peer support members, and at least 2 to 3, depending on how big the group is, and then the MHP. And then that walks through a whole process. We use the ICISF. I always forget what that's. I brought it out here so I would remember. International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. So that's what it stands for. But I really like theirs. It's had some criticism, but I continue to use theirs because they have a nice format of walking through it. It was put together by a psychologist and a firefighter. And, we start out with the facts, what happened. And we start with kind of a timeline with who was there first. We invite dispatch. They often get overlooked. So we invite dispatch to come because they're a part of this. And we have them, who was the call taker? Who was the dispatcher? And we go through that. And then who was first on scene? What happened? What did you do? What did you experience? And then who was next? And we go through the whole thing. And what that does, I really like because you don't have the whole picture. You have one piece of the pie from your experience being on scene. And what this allows you to do is to hear the whole picture of what happened, and it fills in gaps and actually helps you heal. And so we start with facts, and then we go into what were your reactions, on scene, and what were your reactions after you left? What symptoms have you experienced? We cover that. Usually I cover symptoms and then I do a little teaching on PTSD, what kind of symptoms you could experience. When do you go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic stress disorder? Um, and so we talk about different things, how to pay attention to your spouse or your closest family members or friends, because they're the ones who are going to see things before you do, and to listen to them. If things are happening, you're yelling at the kids and you're isolating the different things that happen when you're not dealing well with your trauma. So, and then one thing that actually ICSF doesn't have in theirs that I have added in that I really love is at the end in closing, I ask, is there anyone here you want to thank for what they did during this incident? Because there's not enough appreciations that happen in the first responder world. And it's a beautiful thing to hear. Hi, Chris. To hear them thank each other. And it's a really nice way to close a debrief. Anything you want to add there, Chris?
I just logged in. I'm not sure what you missed, but yes, the being thankful for each other. I think that a lot of times we just hold these things in, and being able to circle those things out in a debrief, and then being able to thank each other for what part you played in it. Oftentimes we don't really understand it, and somebody may have played a key role to save you behind. So that's a big ability to be able to do that, especially in a safe group setting.
Thank you. So Chris is the sergeant of the wellness team at Seattle that I work very closely with.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're on, Chris. I'm so grateful for Chris for introducing me to you, Phyllis. I have appreciated so much of what I've learned from you. And I think I covered the foundation of kind of what we've talked about before too. So I want to open it up to the group for conversation. So again, I'll have a few people that I'll record. Your comments are always so good. But I do want people to feel like they can be free in conversation. So I'll turn off the recording after a few comments or questions. So does anybody want to make a comment or question right now? Don, what's on your mind?
Well, so I use a lot of analogy and metaphor whenever I'm trying to explain to help people understand because the folks that I come in contact with are the really anti-therapy, anti-emotion crowd that, like I said, don't want to have anything to do with me. So when I try to paint that in a way that helps people understand that this applies very much to first responders, but also to human beings as a whole.
Yeah.
And I guess the question I would ask everybody here is, do you have to be strong to be a first responder or to be in the military? Do you believe you have to be strong? Naturally, the reaction is, of course, you have to be strong. Look what everything that you have to do, all the stuff you have to suffer through. And then I would ask, have you ever seen the World's Strongest Man competition where they lift all the boulders and the cars and stuff like that? Strongest people in the world, right? Lifting these massive weights for unbelievable amounts of times. When they finally put that weight down, does that mean that they're weak, or does it mean it was just time to put it down? You sign up to be a first responder and you do all these things, you make these sacrifices for your country and all this kind of stuff. You pick up these impossible weights. But because, like me, I was raised in the Midwest, buckle the Bible belt, right? Men don't cry, emotions are weakness, the stigma is drilled down deep. We're not allowed to put that down because it's what we signed up for. That doesn't make any sense. And so when I try to tell people that are a little hesitant about stepping into this particular process, you have to look at it like you're lifting the heaviest weight known of all time. And for you, it's a Tuesday. And so when you go to finally put that weight down, you're fighting past all that guilt and shame, like you're betraying some system, and you're not. Because even the strongest people need to have a spotter every once in a while.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's good.
Well said. Thank you, Don. Appreciate that.
Welcome.
And then Rich, what's on your mind?
Uh, Phyllis, as you know, in 1967, there was nothing available for us.
Oh, yeah.
Not a thing. In fact, I got my first set of counseling in 1991, and it was through my last 23 years of service was with DEA, and in 1985, I believe it was, DEA decided to form a trauma team, and it was a peer selection process.
Mhm.
They trained us for several weeks to be dispatched to shootings or traumatic incidents to help with the families. I had three deployments. One of them was when I was in San Francisco. The two agents were killed, one wounded down in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
and so we didn't. We that was the first time. In fact, uh, the preliminary meeting that we had with all the people that were going to be involved, uh, one of the clinicians said, we're trying to figure out, guys, how this is going to work, and getting people to want to get into counseling and want to talk about it. Anybody have any thoughts? I reluctantly raised my hand, and they called on me, and I said, just make it mandatory.
Mm.
I said, if you make it mandatory, you're taking the stigma away from from me. You're taking it away from anybody else. You know, somebody says, "Oh, Rich went to see counseling." Yeah, if I didn't go, I wouldn't have a job. You know, it's a requirement. So that helped immensely. And and then during the training, I was able to. They played excerpts of certain movies like Live and Die in L.A., The Onion Field, and a couple others. Well, during the Onion Field, after they played their excerpts and the lights came on, I was just soaking wet.
Mm.
And the clinician said to me, well, so what was that all about, Rich? I said it reminded me of my kidnapping
Ah,
as a 6 month rookie out of the academy. And so he asked me to have dinner with him that night so we could talk about it. But yeah, it's important. It's the great work that you're doing, and I appreciate it.
well, you have quite a story to tell. You've been walking this journey longer than anyone else.
Yeah,
And um, I'm glad that you have found the healing. And it's a journey. It's a lifetime journey, isn't it?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I have PTSD from everything that I've been through.
for sure.
There's some more, to the story. And I think that helps, when you know what it feels like,
Yes,
it gives you greater compassion to help others.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rich is one of the ones that just keeps spurring me on to keep this going because he had so many things happen in his story and how many decades it's taken to for him to kind of have the freedom in a tribe to be able to release these stories. And it's very moving to me. And Rich has just been an
Mm.
incredibly compassionate person on our platform. So I'm glad that this work that you could be here, Rich, and have this conversation with us too. So yeah, thank you. Thanks. And then Catherine. And then I think after you, I'll shut off the recording.
Well, thank you, Phyllis. I had a few things that I wanted to just kind of follow up. I'm on the East Coast, so I'm in the Philadelphia area, and I will say New York is pretty good from what I've observed and just what I've found.
Mhm.
New York is doing pretty well as far as providing support, although they have a lot of admin issues, so I don't know how successful the support element is. And Virginia is really good. Philadelphia is quite behind, but they did just begin a wellness department. So they're figuring it out. But what I have kind of learned, and I've discussed this, Sarah, with David a lot, is the West Coast is leaps and bounds ahead of us over here. And I think that from just like a civilian perspective, I think that makes sense just because our lifestyle is so different. And I think, Rich, we've talked about this. Over here, we're just like living off of adrenaline stress and 16 cups of coffee a day. And that's just like our lifestyle over here. I think the West Coast has a much more you know, they're just a little bit more progressive when it comes to taking care of yourself and doing what you need to do um, from a personal wellness perspective. So I think it just makes sense that you guys over there are a little bit more ahead of the times than we are, but we're figuring it out. We're picking it up.
Good.
Um, and then I wanted to share, I really appreciated what you had mentioned. I think it was the first question Sarah asked you about, what you kind of observed about the riots and what you wish the general public sort of understood, because that's what really sort of started me on the journey that I'm on. I was living in New York City when the riots happened, so we had our own situation over here. And I had a lot of friends who were participating in them, and they couldn't understand. I was a civilian. Why wasn't I participating? I was being challenged a lot for supporting police, even though I wasn't very loud about it. I just had a police family. And that's when I was like 33 at the time, but that's when I started to realize that the general public doesn't understand or doesn't think about the things that law enforcement and first responders and military sort of go through. It's really not in their like line of sight at all. And I couldn't believe that. So that's when I learned that. And then, starting doing what I'm doing, I've begun to speak to, clinicians and civilians in my community just because I want them to understand a little bit more. And I have this sort of unique, like, gray area perspective where I'm not a first responder. I've never been a first responder. I could never be a first responder. I'm not married to a first responder, but I'm very much a civilian. But I do have like a backdoor window into what the lifestyle is like and what they do experience. And so I've had the privilege to be able to share that with other civilians. And I think my perspective, one, they're a little bit more open to it because I am a civilian and I meet them where they're at. And two, I just come from, their world and I can share from it from a different place, I think. And it's been absolutely unbelievable and incredible because I have people coming up to me after I speak all the time. Like, it's just not something that I ever would have thought about. The law enforcement specifically, they just become the face of the entire Justice Department and the justice system. And besides dealing with car accidents or whatever else, the general public doesn't really deal with them. And so I just wanted to share that because I really appreciated sort of your perspective about the riots and what you want more people to understand, because I definitely resonate and feel the same.
Yeah. I have an interesting story that Chris would know this story as well, that we have an officer who is actually a junior high teacher. And he was trying to help his students, understand who are all hating police. So he went and began doing some ride-alongs and talking to police, and it wasn't anything like he thought, he said. And he was so amazed by it, he actually became a Seattle police officer. And
Wow.
he said, now he goes back to, I said, do you go still talk to those students? He goes, yeah. He said, I go back and I'm telling him a whole different, story of what it, is like to be a police officer and the perspective. And I wish we had more of that, people who maybe have come to understand and talk about it, because we need to educate the public better.
Mm-hmm.
But the
100%.
first priority is taking care of all of you. Second is the public.
Yeah.
That's great. What's on your mind, Michelle?
Phyllis, so I want to say thank you, first of all, because we absolutely do need more of what you're offering Seattle. And I hope that that spreads across to the Midwest. My dispatching career was in California and Nevada, but I am experiencing what rural police departments are like in Idaho. It's definitely behind the times for sure. But I really wanted to point out that I think it's so amazing that you're having the departments pay for the sessions. When you said that, I'm like, yeah, we all get great insurance, but it's the perception, that perception of support. And I know that my last day in dispatch, I ended up breaking down in dispatch to people that never in a million years would I have thought they would ever see me shed a tear. But I knew I was walking out on my team when they said, okay, we're placing everybody on administrative leave, 3 dispatchers, 17 officers from this incident. Like, I knew it was mandatory, but I still felt that I was betraying my team. And I felt intense shame that I'll never forget that feeling when I walked across the comm floor, leaving my team to still do their job. So I think we're still going to battle those feelings, but knowing that, well, everyone else is doing it too. All the other dispatchers and the officers, everyone who was on this call, this is mandatory. And the department wants us to go seek help. unfortunately, I had, the department showed betrayal in other ways after that when I pursued the PTSD route with workers' comp and everything. But it was a start to at least know that this was mandatory, and it's not like just you are being selected to leave,
Mhm.
your team. So I just want to show, I want you to know that that goes a long way with having the department show their support that way.
I agree. Yeah, it means a lot to the officers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great point. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Michelle. Yeah, the stigma attached can almost be life and death, isn't it?
Mhm.
Whether the department, the perception of whether the department cares or not can make all the difference in whether the officer gets help or not, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Because research has shown that admin betrayal is the greatest wound, even over critical incidents.
we
Yeah.
see it for years on this platform in the stories. The
Yeah.
betrayal. Yeah, I don't want to put somebody on the spot on the recording, but somebody brought that up, and it was interesting because the views on YouTube, when I put betrayal, agency betrayal, that was one of the highest. It was not really promoted so much because it was more of an in-house conversation. The amount of views on agency betrayal was like completely telling. I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, whoa, we need to talk about this. So, yeah, yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
So I am gonna, is there anybody else that would like to speak while it's recorded? I'm just gonna wait for a second. If not, we're gonna have our nice family discussion here. So all of you watching on YouTube, you get to be part of this if you come on and join us. It's always very rich and powerful. So looks like I'm going to shut off the recording now. Phyllis, amazing. Before we get on to our discussion, is there anything that you want us or anybody watching this to walk away with?
Taking care of yourself, one incident at a time. Don't let it build up. Um, find the help. I use EMDR. I find it's been an amazing tool. I wish I had learned how to do it sooner. There's a lot of good tools out there, and it is hard. It feels. I know officers sometimes or first responders feel like they're weak to ask for help, but actually, what I want to say, it's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
Excellent. Phyllis, thank you so much.
You're welcome.